Boker Tov, everybody. Boker Tov, Rabbi Wolf.
Good morning, Boker Tov.
So we are back. Summer vacation is behind us.
Hard to believe. Hard to believe.
How was your summer?
It was good. It was good. It was relaxing. Happily, this year I didn't travel. The farthest I went was the north of Israel, so I got to enjoy my backyard. I got to pick my tomatoes, and I got more writing. It's in my business. I got more writing than I thought I would get done, less than I wanted. So that's pretty.
That's a good thing.
Par for the course.
That's a good thing.
Nice part is the fact that we don't go back to work for another 2 months, so I can hopefully get more done before.
That's right. You go back to work.
Yeah,
after
school
the
started yesterday,
Chagim.
but not those of us who.
Not the universities.
Not the universities.
Got it. Wow. Okay. So here in Israel, we titled today's topic, and first of all, it's wonderful being back to be able to talk to you. I always enjoy hearing your thoughts, talking about these really critical, important issues. The struggle around Israel's Jewish identity. Now, on the one hand, this is always in the background of Israeli society,
Right.
But now, even more so with election fever, there is a fevered pitch around this issue today. So do you want to give a little more background to what's going on, where it comes from? And
Yeah, up until recently, I'd actually had a sense of calm around the nature of Israeli political discourse. I'm sorry to say this for those of you listening in America, but finally I got this sense that there are political communities which are actually more extreme and more extremely, I was going to say crazy, than Israelis, judging from some stuff that I read about goes on in the States. But we're back in form now in terms of being extreme. One of the central, I think partly because most Israelis do not believe that any kind of final accord with the Palestinians is in the offing. And because economically, thank God, we're doing fine. In fact, we're doing superbly. I don't know what the president. Of course, nobody knows what the present possible downturn in the world economy is going to lead to. Whether it's going to be a recession, whether it's going to be depression, God forbid, or whatever. But in the meantime, things are. The price of gas went down 2 days ago.
right.
So at that point, what happens is that there are really two major issues which are at the center of the president's elections. The first issue, which I'm not going to talk about, is whether you want to have Benjamin Netanyahu continue as the prime minister or not. I mean, basically, a lot of it is you want him, you don't want him. It's really a referendum on the man.
Another referendum.
Another referendum on the man. So that part is so that's one issue. The other issue that's come up, which has always been in the background, but was actually fomented by the person who forced these new elections, Avigdor Lieberman, is around the question of what is been called hadata, or religionization. Now, the question of to what degree Israel should be, the Jewish religion should be a force or be a factor in the formation of Israeli identity and practice, and to what degree it should or should not impinge upon people's individual freedoms, has been a major issue from day one.
Right.
It's rooted in the fact that Judaism, as opposed to Islam, in fact, there's no other religion like this, to the best of my knowledge,
Right.
is a seamless merger of national, ethnic, and religious identity and principle. Trying to separate them is practically impossible, and those who I do not want to have, whose values do not permit or just don't believe in God or whatever, they find any element of religiosity to be an anathema. And of course, religious people want everybody to be religious because they believe that that's what God commanded everyone. To what degree can you compromise? I've sort of stated extreme cases. Obviously,
Right.
there's a
Right.
very large spectrum in between. And that issue has always been in the background. Things came to a greater head, I think, from the 80s on, because the ultra-Orthodox parties became part of the government. The Religious Zionist Party at the time, Mafdal, the National Religious Party, was always much more. It was a junior partner in the government. It was always tried always to be much more amenable. It tried to be more. It tried to be more compromising, and at the same time, it was able to do that because the founders of the country, by and large, even though they were no longer religiously observant, had been raised in a traditional
Right.
environment.
Right.
So as a result, they had the same, most of them had the same kinds of sensitivities and the appreciation for what traditional religion represented and its role in the formation of Jewish national identity, so that they were willing to they were receptive to the needs for to the need for have Jewish content in the public square. Ben Gurion, the founding prime minister, was smart enough to realize that if he wants to make sure that the uh, religious part of the community can be part of of the Jewish state, that there are certain things that really could not be foregone. So all public buildings, all public establishments, the army had to have kosher food. It had to run based on kashrut because otherwise soldiers wouldn't go. And they'd be
Religious,
safe.
right?
Religious
Religious will be able to
soldiers
take part.
and traditional soldiers.
Right.
Don't forget this is a very large percentage of the Jewish community here, which is not orthodox, but is profoundly traditional, and keeping kosher is a big part of that. So that was one thing, that Saturday is the day of national rest and Jewish holidays and things like this. As time went on, two things happened. First of all, the children, and more importantly, the grandchildren of many of the founders, who did not grow up in traditional backgrounds and didn't have the same sensitivities that they had imbibed with their mother's milk, literally, didn't, were more and more alienated from religion as they imbibed what became more and more Western, postmodern, post-religion, atheist ideologies. And that they had a tradition for that because there was a very strong atheist, secularist element in the founders of the state. In any case, at the same time, the degree of religiosity among religious Jews went up, and they became more and more. They became more and more not aggressive, but certainly more and more punctilious in their own observance and what they expected. And thirdly, from the 80s, the ultra-Orthodox became a major factor in Israeli politics. So they, rather than living in their own little world and just doing what they do, they increasingly became a force and made demands. And for better or for worse, insisted on, what should we say, more stricter standards in all kinds of areas, plus including matters of kashrut, but also in terms of matter of personal status. And as time went on, for political reasons, they became the dominant factor in the chief rabbinate, as opposed to the religious Zionists, who always saw themselves as part of the Zionist enterprise. Now, when you add to that the Russians who came here starting with the fall, well, they've been coming since the 1960s. But the mass immigration in the wake of the breakup of the former Soviet Union, you have two things. First, you have a significant population among them who are not technically Jewish, at least not in terms of Jewish tradition, and Jewish tradition still rules the definition of who's Jewish here. In other words, you have to be born to a Jewish mother or to have been converted in a way that's compatible with traditional Jewish law. And many of these, and A and B, at the same time, or a little bit before that, the law of return was amended to say that it's not just a matter of person born Jewish or a Jewish mother. Who is a Jew? A Jew is a person for purposes of the law, of this specific law. If you had one Jewish grandparent, now there was a tremendous amount of logic to that, historical logic, because the Nazis. Yesterday we marked 80 years of the beginning of World War II.
Right.
The Nazis defined a Jew as a person with one Jewish grandparent. So the idea was anybody who would have been persecuted by the Nazis as a Jew has a place in the land of Israel. So that actually made a lot of sense. The problem is that as a result, you have hundreds of that. You have like 300,000 non-Jews who never had any idea they were Jewish and had a desire to be Jewish, and whose sensitivities and value system is not Jewish in any way, shape, or form,
Now
coming
living
and
in the
living in
Jewish
Israel.
state.
Right. And they learn Hebrew and they go to the army and they integrate very nicely. But they're not Jewish. So the question becomes, who can they marry? So sometimes you have intermarriages like that. Sometimes there are conversions. But increasingly, you have a very, very disgruntled anti-Jewish, anti-Judaism factor. And they are the base of this Avigdor Lieberman, who was the one who forced the who forced the elections. Another element of this is that in 1949, Ben Gurion allowed yeshiva students who were sitting and studying 24 hours a day, but on a regular basis, to be exempt from the draft. You're talking about a few hundred people. Ben Gurion figured that Orthodoxy was going to go the way of the world anyways. So he said, you know what, again, out of sentiment, just to preserve that which was destroyed by the Nazis, we'll have this, whatever. Under Begin, the number of those students ballooned to the degree that now the number of Haredim who don't go to the army and as a result can't work because one is pegged to the other is the size of a division, tens of thousands, and many, including myself, resent that, especially because even among the Orthodox community in the religious Zionist world, we have yeshivot where you go for 2.5 years or 3 years. You go to you study in yeshiva, and then you go to the army, and there's no contradiction. And personally, I have not seen the quality of the Torah learning of the Haredi world is any better than that comes out of as a result that comes out of the Haredi world. So that's a real issue, because those of us who pay taxes and go to the army, and if not the army, then my children went to the army. My children went to national service. I had one girl that went to the army. There's a lot of resentment there, and that's really really an issue. The Haredim will reply that, and this is a serious issue, because their children are educated in an isolated manner. They're not part of the regular educational system. They don't have the tools to be able to deal with the outside world if they were going to the armies. Therefore, they would stop being religious. There is a concern. It definitely happens. It's like every parent. You want your parents to turn out. You want your children to turn out exactly as the way you want, and some of them don't do that, right? So, in any event, so all of that is the background, and I think because all these other issues, like war and peace and stuff like that, were not really on the agenda. So this came to a head. Over the past 25 years, something interesting has been going on in the country in general. On the one hand, we have been, like the rest of the world, flooded by Western postmodern culture, which is rabidly anti-religious, and I use the word rabid in purpose. Sure. It preaches atheism. It ridicules everything that's traditional, whether it's the family or whether it's, the one of the major themes of American TV is the father is an idiot and the father's a fool, or there's no father. In an attempt to say that only the mothers can do everything. Although I don't know any single mothers. I was raised by a single mother. I don't know any single mothers who think that way. But okay. And so all of these sort of very nefarious kinds of influences do come here as well. That's number one. And number two, and in general, it's sort of like I can make up my own life. There's no truth. There's no this. There's no that. People get this from the internet and so on. So on the one hand, that has definitely taken root here. On the other hand, for reasons that are mixed, it's not exactly clear to me why, but the old secular atheist Zionism that founded the country has been in recession, if it hasn't tanked totally.
Right. In
its place, part of that I think has to do with the Oslo Accords and so on. That's for another discussion. But the failure of the Oslo Accords and the buses that started blowing up like right afterwards, created a value vacuum rather among many Israeli Jews, and that vacuum has been increasingly been filled with Jewish identity. Now, it's not Orthodox observance, it's not yet, but it certainly is very, very Jewish, and it's profoundly Jewish. More and more people are studying, more and more people are keeping kosher, more and more people, they have the percentages. There was a recent book, which I'm writing a review of, actually, in Hebrew, but the book will come out in English hopefully soon, by two guys. One is Shmuel Rosner, who some of you might know from the Jewish Chronicle from LA, and Jewish Journal from LA, sorry. And the other is Professor Camille Fuchs, who's a emeritus professor of statistics and surveying at University of Tel Aviv. And their findings over the past 2 years was that the percentages of Jews for whom being Jewish is a profoundly important part of their identity and informative, if you put the average Israeli, which is about 55%, together with those who are a little bit more Haredi, a little more religious, you come out to like 80%. Or more than 80%
of the Jewish population.
Of the Jewish population. And again, this is not necessarily according to Jewish law and everything, but it's definitely profoundly Jewish and creates a something of a spectrum, or something of a lowest common denominator uniting the people. Some of the numbers are really striking. So, for example, over 80% of the Jews in the land of Israel believe in God, but not a sort of like deist God who threw the switch and went on vacation, right? Talking about a God who hears prayers and is involved in history and is there and accessible and so on. Very traditional view of God, and that's a very central thing,
right?
So that's been happening, and you can see it in all kinds of different places. How the country is much more Jewish than it was, say, 27 years ago when I came here.
Right.
So that's on the one hand. So it's interesting. So you have on the one hand a clear momentum, which is for deepening Jewish awareness and identity and knowledge, and also to drive the people together. And at the same time, that percentage of the community, which is generally either Russian or the children or grandchildren of the founders, who instead of, this was raised in a very important book, which again was not translated, I'm sorry not, which was written by the founding editor of the Hebrew weekly Makor Rishon. His name is Amnon Lord. His book is called "We Lost Everything That Was Dear to Us." And he argues that what happens to the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the founders was that they didn't go the way of this. When secular Zionism failed to provide them with what they believed, instead of going in the Jewish direction, which they despise. I'm sorry, there's no other word for it.
No.
For all kinds of, I guess, psychotic reasons.
Psychological.
No, psychopathological reasons. There is this. By the way, there is this phenomenon. I don't know if it exists in any other people, but there's a thing that was already coined in Europe called the Jüdische Selbsthass, Jewish self-hatred. That for whatever reason, you either are very positively Jewish or you just can't. You just want nothing.
Right.
We are people given to extremes sometimes. Anyways. So these people, but people can't live in a vacuum in terms of their values. So they pretty much absorbed the entire postmodern atheist, materialist, neo-Marxist kind of values that you find in Europe, which is destroying Europe, but I'll leave that, in Europe and in the elites in the United States, especially in the universities in the United States. I have a very dear friend she's a Facebook friend, but we've gotten to know each other fairly well, at the University of Chicago, who is literally the poster woman for being persecuted for being a person of faith. She's a very religious Catholic, and she's her career as a first-rate medievalist is being destroyed because of her beliefs.
Wow.
In any event, so from those centers, so you put together the understandable resentment about the fact that Haredim don't go to the army, and that they symbolize what these people don't want to be, That feeds that also combines it feeds the feeds this general sort of like postmodern great grandchildren of the founders, and that's where this stuff is coming from. But it's just incredibly vicious.
Right.
It's I don't know how to I really don't know how to describe it. I've wasted too much time on Twitter the past few weeks. You're on the way with my summer, trying to asking for reason. I'll give you an example. If the country is now going to decide exactly how much Judaism is going to be on Shabbat and what's going to be here, what's going to be there, and what is religious coercion and so on. You want to discuss it, fine, but do it out of knowledge. And the forces, those forces which oppose any Jewish content, say no, we should not waste our children's time with studying or teaching about Judaism or Jewish history. So, I sit there flummoxed. I mean, I believe in knowing everything. I mean, that's my thing. So, I mean, you can't know everything, but you know, I have very Catholic taste in everything, from music to philosophy to history to whatever. In other words, the argument is that the identity and the cultural fabric of a country will be set by people who will bring to those decisions less information than the average normal person would bring when he's buying a used car or buying an apartment.
That is very well put.
If you're buying a used car, you take it for a test. You go to the mechanic, he checks it out, and says, "Is this worth buying?" If you're buying an apartment, I don't know if I've never bought a house in the United States, but I know here, if you buy a house, you bring an engineer, and he tells you is there water damage, is there this, is there that, what's the state of the plumbing. You have to know this stuff if you want to make an informed decision. Otherwise, you're being irresponsible. You're being stupid, because you put your money into something which is not worth anything. And here, they want to make a decision about the nature of the Jewish population, the Jewish identity of the country, with knowing nothing.
Right. Just to clarify for people to understand, like on a real day-to-day level, you're talking about some parents or politicians or leaders or whatever who are pressuring schools to remove classes and programs that teach over Jewish identity and Jewish history to their children. And by them doing, and you're basically saying by them doing that, they are withholding information to allow.
Well, that's something else. There's another dimension to that. First of all, it is true that most of those who provide this extra education in the schools, because the budgets are limited, are Orthodox. And the fear is that they're going to try to missionize and make them Orthodox. My position is, good, you have secular teacher colleges. Train secular teachers to impart Jewish knowledge to the children in a way which isn't missionizing or isn't threatening. Very simple. It's possible. I attended when I was a kid. I attended for 9 years actually. For 9 years, a school in Boston, of all places, which ran Ivrit V'Ivrit, was founded by secularists, was run overwhelmingly by secularists, and which had absolutely no religious overtones whatsoever. But I received a phenomenal Jewish and Israeli, actually, education at the time. At the same time, I went to public school. So it's doable. And most of the teachers many of the teachers we had were Israelis. Who came on sabbatical or whatever the case might be. So it's possible. So I said, go do that. No, we can't waste our time with them. Well, that's something else.
They call it a waste of time.
Else. So we don't want them, but we don't want anything else either. So I've never heard educators arguing for educating to ignorance. It doesn't. Maybe I'm too old. Maybe I'm old fashioned. But to me, it makes absolutely no sense. And it's adumbrated, or actually it's aggravated by the sort of contemporary idea of that experts don't know what to talk about. There's a wonderful book by, I think his name is Douglas Murray, called The Death of Expertise, which I'm in the middle of. The idea is that in the age of Google, And the age of Wikipedia, we don't need to go. We don't have any expertise. So doctors are always complaining that Dr. Google is just as good as a guy who went to medical school, or Professor Google, or Rabbi Google. You don't need to go to you don't need to go to the expert, which is well, in the case of Dr. Google, you could pay with your life or something like that. But at the end of the day, it's so. I don't think so. Who are you to have an opinion? I mean, some people don't have a right to opinion if they don't know enough. I'm sorry, that's the way it is. You want to have an opinion. One of the nice things about Torah is it's very democratic. You want to learn Torah, you learn, and then you get to a certain stage. Doesn't matter where you're born or what your circumstances were. You study enough, you get there. This was, of course, only males until recently, but now there are plenty of women that are Talmidot Chachamot, that are rabbinic scholars, that have a right to an opinion too. But that's the deal. You do the heavy lifting, and then you can have an opinion. This other stuff is like it's horrific. And anyway, so that has become this situation, basically a faith-based community which is getting more and more faithful, being viciously attacked by Judaism being attacked by an element which is just I don't recall ever seeing anything this.
So tell me, I want to hear your thoughts on this analogy that I use when I talk about this issue. First of all, I've been following the statistics. I've been here also 29 years. Thank God, seen the development of the Jewish people in the land of Israel over the past few decades. And I see the strength with my own eyes. I see the strengthening of the Jewish identity in Jewish society. I see the strengthening of the ultra-Orthodox as their integration in the army and the work.
That's one of the ironies. The irony is that one of the things, the reason, ostensibly the reason that the government couldn't be formed this past time or in other elections, and frankly, if the numbers keep going this way, we could be going for a third round of elections too. Is the fact that there was a bill to draft the ultra-Orthodox yeshiva students, which wasn't accepted, and what's crazy is that it's really just political grandstanding, because anybody who looks at the figures knows that slowly but surely the ultra-Orthodox are more in increasing numbers are being drafted, and they are going to work.
Right.
And if you want to have a sea change, or really a tectonic change in a traditional society, and you don't want it to be a disaster, it has to be done over time.
Right.
Societies don't change with the news cycle the way that we think. Israel tried to do that before. They tried to take the Yemenites and turn them into secular Ashkenazim, and it was a disaster. They tried again with the Ethiopians, taking out a traditional side, throwing them into the secular 20th century, and we're still suffering with the results. It's stupid,
right,
and short-sighted. So yeah, there might have been ways to be able to write this law, and the Haredim were actually willing to go along with much of it. But although there's plenty of blame on their side, I'm not cutting them any slack on this. But it's the whole business is not useless. That's the word I'm looking for. Superfluous.
Right.
Now, there's enough trouble in life. Enough things happen in life.
That means create issues.
Yeah, it's create issues. Enough stuff. Yesterday there was a border incident where the Hezbollah fired into Israel. And
that's an issue.
Back. That's an issue.
Huge.
The Iranians are ready to destroy us, and we're sitting there fighting about really secondary.
About the right law to get ultra-Orthodox to the army when they're going to the army anyway. Exactly. Anyway, so the point I was trying to make is, like, society is strengthening its Jewish identity, and also the positive with the integration of the ultra-Orthodox, and yet you have this struggle over Israel's Jewish identity, which is really not a struggle in the populace. Right. It's a struggle between a minority elite that is basically, my analogy is it's a fighting lion in the corner with a broken leg that basically knows they're losing the battle, but they're going to fight even harder than before because they know they're losing the battle.
Look, there's also an issue. Look, there are issues that need to be resolved. For example, I don't know who these people are who don't have cars because I sit enough time, I sit enough traffic jams to know that lots of people have cars.
Too many.
About public transportation on Shabbat. There is no, outside of Haifa, there is no public transportation on Shabbat. It's a day off. And effectively, in most places, we have what used to be in America, blue laws. In other words, things aren't open on Saturday. So people we don't really have Sunday here. So people who want to go shopping, it's harder. Absolutely, it's a problem. On the other hand, the many people, including non-religious people, think that non-Orthodox people are of the opinion that it's not healthy to adopt the 24/7 kind of model of life in Israel that has affected the United States and other parts of the West. And
a day of rest is healthy.
A day of rest is healthy
for society.
So it's a real it's not an easy business, and it's cast in the sense of rights. Now that's my right to this, my right to do that. Now all of the West is all about me. We worship me. It's one of the reasons why Western society takes pagan, because basically paganism is narcissism. But the discourse of rights, that you're violating my rights or this and the other thing, is not a healthy way of looking at the world if that's the total way to look at it. In other words, Judaism, for example, which is not totally a Western religion and doesn't necessarily have to or is able to align itself with everything that the West comes up with. We are in the Middle East. We are partly Eastern religion. We are partly a Western religion. Judaism speaks not so much in the language of rights, there are rights, of course, but in the language of obligations.
Correct.
So the idea that I should have to do something because for the larger good, or I have responsibility to somebody I never met, is a built-in, or to a larger goal, is a built-in part of Jewish tradition. Listen, it comes to expression in two, one good, one not so good ways. For example, there is the sense of Jewish solidarity in this country that everybody's responsible for everybody else, and there's a expression, Kol Yisrael, all Jews are responsible for each other, is really very much alive. When it comes to charity and stuff like that, but charities, writing a check or giving a credit card I'm not saying it's cheap, but it's not. You're not as involved. The percentages of voluntarism, where people give up their free time for something else, are unbelievable. Whether it's a question of homeless shelters, whether it's a question of there's a lot of organizations that give up medical equipment to people who need them. Whether it's a question of volunteering in the police, whether it's a question of volunteerism is a huge business here. It's just a given that you give to the community.
It's part of our social fabric.
And the ultimate example is the army.
Right.
One of the interesting findings of this book by Rosner Fuchs was that a overwhelming majority of Israelis view service in the army as a sacred duty.
Most Israelis.
I'm using the word sacred as a sacred duty.
Even though a majority of that population, they're not Orthodox religious, they're traditional.
It's a sacred duty. And it's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to serve in the army. You don't find that anywhere else in the world. Okay, so this sort of contradiction between the language of discourse, the language of obligation, language of rights is at the center of much of this. Why should I have to eat kosher? Because I want to make sure that all Jews can eat here. Where the army has to
serve together, right?
Serve together in the army. Why is it that do we want to have do we want people to be qualitatively Jewish or not? Now, those who don't like religion are going to have a problem. Those who don't like religion are going to have a problem because, as I said, we are a religio-national civilization, so you can't separate the two.
Right. Which also means that those who don't like religion are upset by that statistic that a majority of Israelis view service in the army as a sacred duty, because to them, that's sacrilegious.
On the other hand, it is as the late Professor Peter Berger once put it, coercion in religious issues outside of the Muslim world does not work. We are open societies, so the only way to be able to, if you believe in the expansion of Judaism in a society or religion, you can't do it. You can't do it coercively. You can't do it with legislation. The only way to do it is through the forces of the market. You market yourself. You develop a language of explanation and of making religious ideas and ideals accessible, on the assumption that what you have to sell. I hate to be so crass about it, but yeah, what you're advocating is something which is a good thing for people.
You know, actually, who was the politician who took that as a flag issue?
Who's that?
Moshe Feiglin.
Right.
He was the most prominent with that outlook.
So that's so the truth, and ironically, Berger actually was an interesting guy. Berger was born Jewish in Vienna in the 30s. His parents, after the Anschluss, converted to Lutheranism in order to be able to try to escape Hitler. When it became clear that the anti-Jewish stuff was actually racial and not racial and not religious, they actually came here, and they lived in Haifa for a number of years during the war. He went to he stayed Lutheran. And then he went to America and became really the leading sociologist of religion in the West, and certainly in the United States. States died a couple of years ago at an advanced stage. So he, in his early books, predicted that secularism was going to sweep away religion, and that was going to be it. And then he turned around in the late 80s, early 90s, and he examined this situation, the state of things on the ground, and he was stunned to discover that religion is doing fine. The only people who don't know that are the people in academia and the cultural elites who actually had faith in God. He held faith in God in contempt. So he has an interesting story. He tells there was a project that was initiated by the University of Chicago called the Fundamentalism Project. The Fundamentalism Project was to examine this weird phenomenon of fundamentalist Christianity, fundamentalist Islam, and so on and so forth. So Berger writes, he said, if you look around the world, religion is spreading, faith in God is spreading like wildfire. The only place it apparently didn't hit is in the University of Chicago. So he said, maybe instead of studying religion, we should actually have a study of detached academics who are not aware of what's going on underneath their noses. So coercion doesn't work, and you have to realize the market forces will, proper marketing will do it, and I hope it's not a fatal mistake, but the mistake of the Haredi and also parts of the religious Zionist community in Israel is that they still believe in coercion. And so, when they talk about Judaism, they say stupid things. Either stupid things or they're stupid things, or they sound like stupid things because they don't know how to express themselves in a way that anybody who with half an education can understand. And they think the only thing to do is pass a law. Passing laws doesn't do it.
But when was the last time a religious law was passed?
It's you don't need to pass it. You don't need that. You don't need. Well, first of all, the Chok HaMarkolim, the one about the supermarkets, but that's not the point. The use of the coercive powers of the rabbinate, for example, is an example. It's already there, but it's used very, very sort of heavy-handed.
See, because I'd like to have not for now, but I'd like to have a conversation with another video with you about positing the opposite, that there is more secular coercion going on the level of the state and than religious coercion.
They are doing so secularists are actually doing what I'm saying religious people shouldn't do. They go to the courts and they try to ban all kinds of things which, in their opinion, are too religious, because religion contradicts basic human rights, where most of these human rights don't exist. They were sort of like created. And I suspect, I don't know. I'm not a prophet, but I suspect that, or hope, that this really vicious anti-Jewish element of the campaign will actually end up boomeranging against those powers. It's happened twice. In 1996, we had a situation like this, although not as vicious. In 1999, in both cases, religious and traditionally identified parties just did amazingly,
Right.
because people couldn't. They were disgusted by this. I'll give you an example. My son, who is a very he's a well-known conservative pundit. He's a well-known conservative Twitter person. He is avowedly modern Orthodox in the real strong sense of the term. He has publicly announced that he's going to vote for the ultra-Orthodox party because he just is so disgusted with the demonization of Judaism and of the Haredim globally.
Right.
Because the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox have tremendous amounts of faith in them. A significant amount of the, there's no word in Hebrew for this, English for this. It's not charity. Of initiatives to help people, whether it's in medical, whether it's clothing, whether it's whatever it is, emanate from the ultra-Orthodox world.
I want to follow that. That one we'll finish up. There was a television program on Arutz Esrim with Boaz Golan last week. I don't know if you saw this segment. And he started to say, listen, a division in the army is around 15,000 soldiers, right? He goes, I'm now going to list for you all the different organizations that number more than 30,000 people that are manned by volunteers, and they are mostly all ultra-Orthodox.
Right.
And they don't just do it for 3 years.
They do it for their
They
life.
do it for their whole life.
Right.
He was doing this. The first time ever I saw a segment, and obviously it's on Arutz Esrim, which is a more conservative channel, and not on
It's
the
our Fox
mainstream.
News.
Right, it's our Fox News, and not the mainstream liberal channels.
Right.
But he is a secular person. He's a traditional, right? Traditional, not Orthodox, traditional. And he was saying, listen, he is totally upset by the bashing the ultra-Orthodox are getting, and specifically for the army issues, because he's saying they are a society of givers, and he was actually giving examples. They will travel from one end of the country to the other end of the country if someone needs medicine, driving hours to bring you medicine. That there are organizations that's what they do.
There are whole ambulance corps which are self-paid for to supplement Magen David Adom.
Right.
There are, it's
Right. He was more than
even
30,000.
during the wars, in the town of Beit Shemesh, for example, which is known as a town which is really suffers from a lot of conflict between the ultra-Orthodox and the non-ultra-Orthodox populations on issues which are controversial. The ultra-Orthodox believe in gender segregation to an extreme which I think that even Judaism doesn't require, but that's their position. Nevertheless, during the last war, 5 years ago, when it turned out that Beit Shemesh was going to be a staging area for the army, the large segments of the ultra-Orthodox community in Beit Shemesh paid on their own. They set up huge tents to provide rest stations and food and cots and whatever they needed for the soldiers. So it's not that.
Listen, the bottom line that I'd like to tell people when I explain to people, and this is when I talk in congregations in America, and they're all upset about the religious state of Israel, I say, folks, there is a small minority of extremists on both sides.
Right.
Small minority of extremists who are vocal on the ultra-Orthodox religious side, and a small minority on the left anti-religious side. And unfortunately, the headlines are filled with those stories, and that's what you're seeing in the news, and that's what we heard, and that's what the politicians talk about, because that's what get them the headlines in order to get the attention. But the majority of the Jewish people were healthy. And if it was up to us, we'd solve all these issues. And so unfortunately, the way I put it is sometimes it's the politicians and even rabbis who create mountains out of molehills, where us on the ground, there is more unity between us than ever before, and we'd be able to work out all of these really complex issues. But we have a love and an achdut, a unified feeling towards one another that will overcome them, and we'll even disagree once in a while, but not to the level that the magazines and the newspapers and the television reports do it, and that unfortunately our politicians make into much worse issues with their sound bites than actually is on the ground. That's my optimistic ending for today's talk.
I agree. I hope it's not inappropriate, but on the questions of the politicians, I recently read a description of a short blurb about Harry Truman. And Truman, when he left the White House, and many of us think he was a great president, not just because he recognized the state of Israel. When he moved
Begrudgingly,
not so much begrudgingly. He wanted to keep faith with Chaim Weizmann, and he had to take on the State Department, and the Secretary of State George Marshall said that he won't support him in the next election if he does it. It's not so begrudgingly.
No, initially, I'm saying initially, but then right. But then he changed his mind. Okay, sorry.
No, I think Michael Oren, in his wonderful book about the American involvement in the Middle East, points out that that Truman was a believing Baptist who knew his Bible, and he saw himself as Cyrus.
Really?
He saw himself as Cyrus. In any event, so when he retired, apparently he didn't have there was no pension for being president. He was living in the same house from which he'd left, which he inherited actually from his mother-in-law, in Independence, Missouri, on the pension of a discharged captain in the artillery, which is what he had been in World War I. And finally, Congress got around to voting about pensions. He shouldn't be able to live. But anyways, they asked him at the end of his life, what did you, how did your life turn out the way that you thought? He said, and he played piano very well. There's a famous picture of him and Lauren Bacall. He's playing piano. Yeah. He says, I actually, at one stage of my life, the choice was between being a piano player in a bordello and a politician. And over the years, I've discovered that the difference wasn't that great. Food for thought.
For a politician. Wow. Well, Rabbi Wolf, it is a pleasure sitting and talking with you about these issues. And again, like we framed it, that even though we're talking about this specific issue, the struggle over Israel's Jewish identity in Israel, this is really a struggle over the religious identity in all over the world in Western society. And like I said, Ki mitzion teitzei tzara. So hopefully people, by listening to what we're dealing with here, they'll be strengthened and help with their own struggles wherever they are.
Hopefully. Well, you know what? The late Sir Isaiah Berlin once said, Jews like everybody else, only more so. So take that.
All right. It should be a good week, good chodesh, good month. It's the prelude to a good year. Everyone, shalom from the ancestral homeland of the Jewish people here in the Judean Hills. Thank you so much for watching. Make it a great day, folks. Shalom.